Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump saying that most of Iran's military installations have been knocked out. That's as he declares the U.S. has a virtually unlimited stockpile of munitions. Mario Tzu at the White House. President Trump reveals Israel struck the very building where Iran was reportedly choosing a successor to Ayatollah Khamenei, as U.S. forces hit more than 1,700 military targets. Iran's air defense systems are reportedly made up of Chinese and Russian equipment. Jason Perry takes a look at how these systems failed to prevent the attacks from Israel in the U.S. Lawmakers brief behind closed doors on the Iran conflict as the debate over war powers escalates. A sharp clash breaks out in a Senate hearing over Iran, and a key vote now set for Wednesday. Chris Bob with updates from Capitol Hill. And in the middle of a war with the Department of Homeland Security not operating at full capacity, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem testifies in the Senate. Jason Blair has the key takeaways.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. We begin tonight in Washington. President Trump saying most of Iran's military installations have been knocked out. And new strikes today are targeting Iranian leadership. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Tzu at the North Lawn of the White House. Mari, good evening.
Hey, Tiff, good evening. That's right. President Trump is saying that the U.S. is, quote, decimating the Iranian leadership. He's saying that the U.S. also has a, quote, virtually unlimited supply of high-end munitions stored in countries around the world. And that's as he says that today's strikes are focused on taking out the Iranian leadership, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio doubling down on his warning that the hardest hits are yet to come. Take a look.
We're going to unleash Cheng on these people in the next few hours and days. You're going to really begin to perceive a change in the scope and in the intensity of these attacks as, frankly, the two most powerful air forces in the world take apart this terroristic regime.
They have no Navy. It's been knocked out. They have no Air Force. It's been knocked out. They have no air detection. That's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out.
Vowing military escalation, President Trump says the Iranian regime had been about to attack Israel and its neighbors, and Operation Epic Fury preempted that action.
You see, we were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that.
Meanwhile, President Trump condemning what he calls the radicals in the Democratic Party for, quote, complaining bitterly about the U.S. strikes in Iran.
History teaches us a simple lesson. Wars without a clear objective do not stay small. They get bigger, they get bloodier, they get longer, they get more expensive. This is not a defensive war. This is not a necessary war. This is a war of choice.
The bottom line is this. The president determined we were not going to get hit first. It's that simple, guys. We are not going to put Americans' troops in harm's way.
Guys like Schumer would say, well, you should have done this. In other words, if I did it, it's no good. If I didn't do it, they would have said the opposite, that you should have done this.
But President Trump also says there's nothing surprising about this, as it's the same lawmakers who wouldn't stand for guests at his State of the Union address. The president mentioning the mother of 23-year-old Irina Zarutska, the Ukrainian refugee who was fatally stabbed last August.
But most people feel, I'll tell you what, I have never had more compliments on something I did. People felt it's something that had to be done.
As I said, in Germany the last 2 days, we are supporting the United States and Israel to get rid of this terrible terrorist regime.
President Trump praising Germany for letting U.S. forces land in its bases, while criticizing the U.K. and Spain for doing the opposite. That's as he's ordering the U.S. government to offer insurance to protect ships carrying oil through the Persian Gulf, so companies aren't scared off by attack risks. The president says the U.S. will ensure the free flow of energy to the world, even if that means the U.S. Navy escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz.
So if we have a little high oil prices for a little while, but as soon as this ends, those prices are going to drop, I believe, lower than even before.
And Tiff, meanwhile, President Trump is threatening to cut off all trade with Spain over the fact that the NATO and European ally is refusing to let the U.S. military use its bases for Operation Epic Fury. Back to you.
All right, Mari, thanks for those updates. U.S. forces hitting more than 1,700 military targets in Iran, and Israel reportedly striking a site in Iran where leaders were selecting a successor to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
President Trump from the Oval Office revealing new details about Israel's latest strike inside Iran. The president mentioning reports of Israeli forces hitting a compound connected to the group responsible for selecting a successor to Iran's supreme leader.
And as you know, 49 people were taken out in the first hit, and I guess there was another hit today on the new leadership, and it looks like that was pretty substantial also.
U.S. Central Command says it now has hit more than 1,700 targets inside Iran. Those strikes targeting command and control centers, military headquarters, missile systems and launchers, and 11 Iranian naval vessels, all 11 operating in the Gulf. Meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces says that it's striking missile infrastructure in central Iran, including ballistic missile launchers and storage facilities. Israel also expanding operations beyond Iran, targeting the Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah in Lebanon just after joining the fight against the U.S. and Israeli forces.
Hezbollah made a very big mistake when it attacked us.
But Iran is also striking back. 2 Iranian drones hit the U.S. Embassy compound in Saudi Arabia. No injuries were reported, though, as officials say the building was empty at the time. The U.S. has since closed its embassies in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait.
About Dubai's consulate, the last update I had with seconds before getting before these cameras was that a drone unfortunately struck a parking lot adjacent to the Chancellery building and set off a fire in that place. All personnel are accounted for.
The State Department issuing departure orders for personnel at 14 embassies across the region, urging Americans to leave by any means available. The U.S. is now preparing military charter flights for citizens seeking to exit the Middle East.
9,000 Americans have been able to leave the region since the start of this war. We have about 1,500 Americans that are requesting assistance with departure.
Meanwhile, Israel reopening its airspace to allow citizens stranded abroad to return home. Across the Gulf, countries including the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar, and even Lebanon facing waves of ballistic missiles and drone strikes targeting hotels, airports, and residential areas, all being struck by Iran. And there are growing reports that several Gulf nations may be preparing coordinated counterstrikes against Iran. President Trump has spent the past year strengthening ties with these Gulf leaders, relationships that could now solidify further as many see a shared threat from Iran. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Iranian regime's air defense systems are reportedly made up of Chinese and Russian equipment, and they appear to have failed to defend against the attacks from Israel in the United States. NTD's Jason Perry takes a closer look.
The war against Iran began after the United States and Israel launched a surprise attack against senior officials of the Iranian regime. A defense analyst at the International Institute for Strategic Studies explained.
The Supreme Leader was in a morning meeting together with his defense minister, the chief of the armed forces, the head of the IRGC, who were all killed in that strike. Subsequently, you saw the U.S.-Israeli strikes hitting especially air defenses.
Iran's air defense networks were in place to prevent such an attack. However, they failed to protect the country's leadership, as well as other targets in the country. And on Tuesday, the Israeli Air Force reported striking more air defense systems in Iran. The Washington Institute reported in December that Iran has relied primarily on Russian systems for its air defense. And the Hudson Institute reported last year that Iran was believed to have acquired Chinese air defense systems, such as Chinese surface-to-air missiles. But how did the air defense systems fail? According to the Vision Times, a scholar at Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research, Xu Sao Huang, says the U.S. likely used a combination of physically destroying Iran's air defense systems, as well as electronic interference and cyber operations to disable Iran's radar systems. And an associate researcher at Taiwan's Institute for Cybersecurity and Decision-Making Simulation, Lin Chaolun, says the Iran-China military cooperation had a structural imbalance favoring offense over defense, meaning more time and effort was spent on how to attack rather than how to defend against attacks, adding that the Chinese supplied air defense assets struggled to counter sophisticated electronic suppression. And by contrast, the United States technology has been repeatedly tested in combat, proving high adaptability and reliability. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Lawmakers today receiving classified briefings behind closed doors on the escalating conflict with Iran. Meanwhile, the Senate hears testimony from the Undersecretary of War on the administration's 2026 National Defense Strategy and its connection to Operation Epic Fury. NTD's Chris Bob has more.
There is no country in the world that has more American blood on its hands than Iran. So I think the president was perfectly within his rights to take the steps that he took. I think it was a necessary step in order to protect American lives.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune saying Congress had been properly informed of Operation Epic Fury. Top administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, CI Director John Ratcliffe, and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane, meeting separately with the Senate and House in closed sessions to discuss ongoing operations. The briefings come as Congress prepares to vote on war powers resolutions requiring explicit congressional authorization for any U.S. participation in hostilities against Iran.
I mean, the idea that the administration in any operation is going to tell 535 members of Congress who never leak about anything, what exactly they're going to do. But they did inform us. They met with us last week. The Gang of Eight heard what was being contemplated. I was called, notified the day that the actual operations got underway.
Inside the Senate Armed Service Committee hearing a sharp partisan clash unfolding over presidential war powers.
We had a diplomatic agreement with Iran on nuclear proliferation, and President Trump withdrew, and he was basically playing politics.
It was a horrible deal. It was a disastrous deal. It would originally allow Iran to be able to have enrichment to the grade that they could make a nuclear weapon. I don't remember him saying anything in 2016 when Barack Obama at the time dropped 26,000 bombs in Syria. And what threat did Syria have to the United States? Does anybody doubt that Iran, if or when they got a nuclear weapon, would deliver it to the United States? They've killed thousands of Americans from the first time they took hostages in November of 1979 to the last time they attacked us in June of 2025. And you want to say he's playing politics? You guys are playing politics. You guys are the ones that are grandstanding.
Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby defending the operation amid questions from committee Democrats.
Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu launched illegal strikes against Iran. This war for regime change is both unconstitutional and dangerous.
Now, there were no missiles being loaded on launchers. There was not a nuclear bomb being rolled out.
So they've been killing Americans for 47 years. This is objectively an historic opportunity. This isn't an example of nation building and this kind of interventionism, because it is looking to the Iranian people to take the initiative.
Senators Tim Kaine, Chuck Schumer, and Adam Schiff announcing that the Senate will vote on Wednesday on a war powers resolution aimed at Iran. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Chris Bob, NTD News.
A funding agreement is yet to be reached in Congress to reopen the Department of Homeland Security. With a war in progress against Iran, some Senate lawmakers expressed an urgent need to get the department fully operational, as DHS Secretary Kristi Noem testifies on Capitol Hill. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
When it comes to the threat level against our homeland, how would you characterize it right now?
Right now, I would say, sir, that we should have our every effort within the Department of Homeland Security out protecting people 24/7.
Funding the Department of Homeland Security while the U.S. is at war with Iran was a big concern on Capitol Hill during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing.
Can we not understand America is under siege now? Likely to be attacked because radical Islam is under siege and they're going to hit back. And we're sitting here looking at each other and not funding DHS?
When asked what the DHS is currently doing to protect the homeland, Noem said that the department is constantly looking to detect threats within the U.S. borders.
We work every single day with our intelligence agencies and law enforcement partners to make sure that we are investigating and finding any threats to the homeland here within our borders.
Committee Ranking Member Dick Durbin criticized criticized Noem on how she handled 2 DHS-involved shootings in Minnesota.
Your agents shot and killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy, 2 American citizens. Your statements caused immeasurable pain to these families. Do you retract these statements identifying these individuals as domestic terrorists?
When we have these situations happen, we always offer our condolences to those families, and I offer mine as well. These are tragic situations, and I can't imagine what these families go through. What I will say is we always work to provide the American people with as much information as possible, that we're relying on reports from the ground and from agents that are there, and working to be transparent, and we'll continue to do all that we can to provide the accurate information and the facts to people as we can.
After a deadly shooting in Austin, Texas, that happened roughly 24 hours after the U.S. first struck Iran, Noem was asked about the shooting suspect.
The shirt said what?
Property of Allah.
Property of Allah. And when you went to his house, you found a what kind of flag?
Iranian flag.
Iranian flag. Wonder how many people are like that here, waiting to pounce. And DHS doesn't have appropriated funds.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, the first major primary elections of the season are underway. Today, voters in Texas and North Carolina pick their nominees for the 2026 midterms. Melina Weisskopf brings us an overview. And in the California governor's race, the Democratic Party asks their candidates to assess their campaigns and possibly drop out. The party seeking to avoid a scenario that could lock them out of the November election. David Lamb has more. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Voters in 2 southern states casting ballots today as North Carolina and Texas hold the first major primary races of this election season. NTD's Melina Weisskopf breaks down what to watch for.
The top race to watch tonight will be for a Texas Senate seat. There are competitive races on both sides of the aisle, but for the Republicans, it will be even closer. You have 4-term incumbent Senator John Cornyn up against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. They're both vying for the Republican nomination. President Trump has said good things about both candidates, but endorsed neither. Right now, polls show Paxton is leading.
They have advantages, huge financial advantages, and their thought is the people of Texas won't really have a choice. We will go out and tell everybody that John Cornyn loves Donald Trump, which he does not.
And on the other side of the aisle, you have Democrats once again pushing to win a Senate seat in Texas. We have Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett up against State Representative James Tallarico.
If you have voted for Democrats, but you're tired of Democratic politicians always folding, you've got a place in this campaign.
But whoever wins the Democrat primary will still face an uphill battle because no Texas Democrat has won a statewide election since 1994. There are also a few House races to keep an eye on, notably where Democrats might be more vulnerable after redistricting. One example is Texas's 34th district. You have one Trump-endorsed candidate, Eric Flores, competing against former Congresswoman Mayra Flores for the Republican nomination. They're vying for a chance to unseat Democrat Vincent Gonzalez. As for North Carolina, the big race to watch in this state is in District 1. 5 Republican candidates are competing to take on Democrat Don Davis. He already had a tight win 2 years ago in a Trump-won district. Though Don Davis is uncontested on the Democrat side, Republicans have made this race more competitive through redistricting. Polls close at 7:30 in North Carolina, closing at 8 and 9 p.m. in Texas. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Meanwhile, as the primary elections edge closer, California Democrats are urged to assess and possibly drop out of the governor's race. The state party chair expressing concerns over the crowded field of candidates. NTD's David Lamb reports.
It's a crowded field for Democratic candidates hoping to become California governor, as this coming Friday marks the final day to declare candidacy. But the California Democratic Party sending an open letter to its gubernatorial candidates urging them to assess the viability of their campaigns. If you do not have a viable path to make it to the general election, do not file to place your name on the ballot for the primary election. And if you decide to file, be prepared to suspend your campaign and endorse another candidate on or before April 15th if your campaign cannot show meaningful progress. The chair of the California Democratic Party says those scenarios are unlikely, but possible. A recent survey found that the top 5 candidates, 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats, are closely divided among likely voters within 4 percentage points of one another. This, as California Democrats chose not to endorse a gubernatorial candidate at their recent convention. Now they don't want the possibility of being locked out of the general election with 2 Republicans facing off. Polls currently show Republican Steve Hilton slightly ahead of the pack. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
A Georgia father has been convicted of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter after his son allegedly shot and killed 2 students and 2 teachers at a Georgia high school in 2024. A jury found him guilty for giving his teenage son the gun he allegedly used in the shooting. Prosecutors had alleged that Colin Gray gave his son Colt access to a gun and ammunition, even though he was aware of the 14-year-old's mental health issues. Gray testified in his own defense, claiming that he never believed his son would commit a school shooting. Gray isn't the first parent to be convicted for the actions of their child. In 2024, jurors convicted 2 parents of manslaughter after their teenage son killed 4 students at his high school in Michigan. A jury found that the parents gave their son a gun and ignored warning signs leading up to the 2021 shooting. Colt Gray has pleaded not guilty. The judge in his case has set a hearing for this month. Coming up, the U.S.-Israel strikes have stopped oil exports coming out of Iran. What impact could this have on Iran's biggest customer, China? Arnie Richards reports. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Today, wars aren't just fought on the battlefield, they're increasingly fought online. Joining us now to discuss the information warfare element of the Iran conflict is foreign policy analyst Bart McCoy. He's a former career diplomat and Energy Department official. And Gerard Filitti, he's a Middle East affairs analyst and an attorney specializing in international law. Thank you both so much for joining us. Bart, I want to start with you. There's a lot of focus now on whether Israel pushed the U.S. into a war. Here's President Trump rejecting that today. Let's listen.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. Based on the way the negotiation was going, I think they were going to attack first, and I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand, but Israel was ready and we were ready.
And Bart, your thoughts on that?
Sure, there is a lot of disinformation out there. Some of it is genuinely believed in by Americans. Most of it is bought and paid for by entities like Iran itself, like China, like other groups, other countries that mean to do us harm. Here's the thing, nobody can beat our military. Everybody in the world knows that they cannot stand up to us militarily. So what they try to do, they try to use psychological operations, psyops, information warfare, to try to, demoralize the American people and to turn the American people against the war. All these countries watched the Vietnam War and they think they learned a lesson from the 1960s. And so China, Iran in particular, have been pushing drugs into this country. They've been pushing fentanyl, they've been pushing heroin. And of course, the other cartels from Latin America have been doing their part. And they've been trying to weaken the moral fiber of Americans. And now they're coming up with this ridiculous statement saying, oh, Israel dragged us into this war. Israel has been our strongest ally. They are the ones that develop the intelligence networks. They're the ones that are allowing us to do the things we want to do. Let Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly compare Israel to, say, the UK, where Keir Starmer suddenly was biting his nails and saying, we had nothing to do with this, we had nothing to do with this. And then when he saw it was popular, turning around and saying, oh, yeah, we're going to let them use our bases.
And Gerard, expanding on that, do these narratives play into the hands of U.S. adversaries like China?
Well, they certainly do, and this is not the first time that we have seen efforts by foreign powers, especially from the Middle East, from Iran, Iran-backed agents, and communist China, putting out narratives in the United States that are meant to demoralize us and pit us against one another. We've seen this for many years now. They are funding efforts in America to turn against democracy, to propagandize the beauty of communism and socialism. They're feeding into campaigns like what we've seen in New York City with Zoran Mamdani and democratic socialists. And when you have an incident like this, when you have a war that is justified as an American war based on a direct threat to the homeland, you will see people abusing narratives in order to turn us against one another in an attempt to destroy our country. And so we all have to be mindful, and when we see these narratives, we have to question where they're coming from, the dark money that is paying for these propaganda campaigns.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio today demanding that the press stick to the facts and hit on what led to the strikes. Let's actually watch that clip now.
Once the president made a decision that negotiations were not going to work, that they were playing us on the negotiations, and that this was a threat that was untenable, the decision was made to strike them. That's what I said yesterday, and you guys need to play it. If you're going to play these statements, you need to play the whole statement, not clip it to reach a narrative that you want to do.
And Bart, in terms of diplomacy, there's a lot of focus on that. Is there negotiating with a regime like the current one in Iran?
You know, Steve Witkoff was talking about it, I think it was this morning, and he said, listen, their opening statement every time we met, their opening statement was, it is our inalienable right to enrich uranium. It is our inalienable right to develop nuclear weapons. We have, I think he said it was 465 kilograms of enriched uranium, enriched to 60%. It's enough for 11 nuclear weapons. And just so you know, it takes a long time to get up to the 60% threshold. Once you're there, it's a very short step to get over 90, which is what you need for a nuke. How do you negotiate with somebody who says their inalienable right is to develop the nuclear weapons? They wouldn't even engage on the question of ballistic missiles and medium-range missiles, which they use to great effect. You know, the critics of the war would have us wait until the Iranians had a nuclear weapon, or until they had thousands and thousands more drones and thousands more missiles, so that they could defend their nuclear weapons sites. Are we supposed to wait until they, you know, drop a dirty bomb over El Udeid Air Base in Qatar?
Definitely a lot there for sure. Gerard, looking ahead though, say remnants of the regime remains, but Iran is isolated, still under sanctions and weakened militarily. Could that be a win for the Trump administration? Or to put it another way, what does a win look like here?
I think President Trump can have different types of wins depending on how far he wants to go. A definitive win would be an end to this regime. It would be a different government in place that is willing to agree to not developing nuclear weapons, to handing over any enriched uranium that it has, to stopping enrichment efforts, to dismantling and destroying its ballistic missiles, its medium-term missiles, and stop investing in terrorism across the Middle East and across the world. That is the minimum win that would happen. I don't think, quite frankly, we really care, or given on the Venezuela example, that President Trump really cares who heads Iran, if that is what they're agreeing to. But at the end of the day, if they're not agreeing to that, we will still continue this endeavor. And I don't see this stopping. If anything, we might then push for an actual regime change, because ultimately America needs certain things. We need to be able to defend ourselves and the region. And unless we have a regime or any government in Iran that's willing to agree to that, we have to keep going.
And Bart, in terms of responses, we're seeing allies like China say they won't support Iran militarily, but will offer moral backing. That is despite a strategic partnership Russia, Iran, and China signed last year, but it has no NATO-like Article 5 trigger. What do you make of China's response here?
I saw a very funny post on X that said, you know, point of view, you're Iran being attacked, and you say, hey, Xi Jinping, we need help us. And China, help us. And China answers, sorry, all I have for you are a couple of sympathetic posts. That's what we've got. They're unable to provide anything technically competent to protect them, and they're absolutely unwilling to take a single step of risk toward helping them. And you could say the same thing about Russia. They've proven that China and Russia are really unreliable allies and that their technology is unreliable as well.
Why do you think that is, given that especially Iran, like 80 to 90% of its oil, sanctioned oil, was going to China? Why isn't China willing to support that militarily?
China is risk averse, I think. They talk big in their own backyard. They're like the dog that barks in his own yard, but if he's outside his yard, he doesn't bark much. They're all they can see. They can't see much farther than the Straits of Taiwan, and President Trump has effectively limited their ability to cross that water. He's cut them off systematically, country by country, region by region, and they can't. Their economy is hurting. Having to pay market price for Venezuelan oil has hurt them, and having to pay market price for Iranian oil once it resumes exporting will hurt them. They have no capability to open or close the Strait of Hormuz. They have no capability to escort tankers. They have to wait for other people to take the risk and come to them.
And Gerard, your thoughts on what this conflict with Iran means for China and its strategic partners?
Well, look, at first we have to realize that Iran sees China as more important for itself than China views Iran. Iran relies on China for its petroleum sales under the table on sanctioned goods, whereas China does have the ability to get oil more from other places, even though it has to pay more for it. At the end of the day, we've seen that Chinese support has not been significant for Iran. Air defense systems were a joke; they were easily defeated. We saw the same thing with Russia's contributions to the war in Ukraine, that both Russia and China, their technologies, as much as they're vaunted in certain press in the West, they're not that fantastic. They are defeatable by the United States and our allies. So that sends a message to Iran that, look, if it's in China's pocket, it's not going to benefit from it. It was a friendship of opportunity for China, and Iran really got nothing out of it. So this also sends a message to other countries that are looking at partnerships with China, namely, China is not a reliable partner. It won't be there for you. And if it does sell you goods, look twice, because they probably won't work.
And Bart, on that note, especially with the Chinese technology looking like it's not performing all that well in Venezuela or in Iran, what does that mean in terms of Taiwan? Does that send a message of deterrence that the U.S. could destroy that type of equipment?
Oh yeah, yeah. The Chinese were touting their anti-ship missiles and things like that, and they see that the U.S. has capabilities to destroy those missiles, to absorb a missile attack, and it is very robust. And they would, if they put any ships into the water, they would be sunk immediately if they offered any kind of resistance to the United States, any kind of hostility to the United States. And Tiffany, may I say something more about the Israel alliance, or have we moved too far past that?
Oh, go ahead. I think that still fits in here because that does look like it's part of China's propaganda too. So
it is. China is pushing that line, and they're pushing it hard because this is a perfect alliance between the United States and Israel. There's a division of labor. The United States has said, we're going to take out the missiles, make sure there are no nukes, and what was the third thing? I've forgotten. And they're focusing on the systems and the ability, the military systems to threaten us. Israel is focusing on taking out the evil people that have been killing the Iranian people, the protesters, the demonstrators. And as far as boots on the ground are concerned, Israel has sent boots on the ground. The IDF announced this morning that they had patrols through Iran last night. They didn't say what they were doing, but they have had boots on the ground. We're not sending boots on the ground. The Israelis are doing that. This is a very robust alliance, and each side is doing its share. And China is pushing this narrative through its bots and through its paid agents, trying to divide the United States, just as Gerard said.
And Gerard, in terms of information war, of course, there's the fog of war element as well. What are you watching for as this conflict unfolds? And also kind of a tack-on question on that, how do you see this playing out in President Trump's April visit to Beijing?
In the information war, I'm looking at two things. I'm looking to see whether there will be actual hacking attempts or any takeover attempts by Iran or Chinese assets of media networks in the U.S., hacking, going through computers, anything that is disruptive, a disruptive wave targeting the U.S. or Israel. We have not seen that yet. We may yet see it. The other thing I'm looking for is I will expect to see more of this language that is trying to drift America apart from Israel, relying on propaganda that somehow Trump is in Netanyahu's pocket. We've seen this playing out from Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. We see a lot of people making these allegations, and you have to see where that money is actually coming from, whether it's Qatar or communist China. But that is only going to intensify. In terms of Trump and Xi Jinping, I think that what we will see is a very tough message delivery, that we, the United States, we are blocking you everywhere in the world that you want to go. We are re-exerting our influence in South America. We have experienced what you want to do in the Arctic regions and have worked with Europe to stop you. We're stopping you in the Middle East. We will stop you in Africa. So do not expand your ambitions, especially to Taiwan, because the United States is finally ready to re-engage China, unlike for many years we've seen with silence.
Gerard Filitti, Bart Marcois, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beijing has been purchasing nearly 90% of Iran's crude oil supplies, but since the recent U.S.-Israel strikes on Iran, oil exports coming through the Strait of Hormuz have come to a standstill. What are China's options? NTD's Arlene Richards explains the dilemma.
On Tuesday, Beijing called for an immediate halt to U.S.-Israeli strikes in Iran.
Paired with the raid in Venezuela earlier this year, there's been a pretty significant impact on China's oil supplies.
For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has been a consistent buyer of Iran and Venezuela's crude oil. It ramped up purchases of Iranian oil to record levels 3 years ago amid talks between Iran and world powers to revive a 2015 nuclear deal that would have lifted significant sanctions on Iranian oil exports.
China gets somewhere between, let's say, 15 and 23% of its seaborne oil from Iran.
Since the strikes began on Saturday, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow channel off of Iran's coast. Nearly 20% of global oil usually gets transported through the strait every day from several Gulf countries. But before the U.S.-Israel strike, the CCP was importing a little over 1 million barrels of Iranian oil per day, up from 700,000 barrels 3 years ago. The two countries had made a deal that gets around the multiple sanctions on Iran and saves Beijing $8 to $10 per barrel against benchmark pricing. Iran was bypassing the sanctions by shipping its oil through Malaysia and Indonesia. Their arrangement has saved Beijing billions of dollars annually and provided Iran with its primary revenue stream.
Donald Trump tightens the noose on the shadow fleet that has enabled all of that. The bigger target is actually communist China, which is increasingly in a box, is going to have to start buying its oil, the huge percentage of its oil, on the open market at full price.
Beijing was buying about 17% of its overall crude oil supplies from Iran and Venezuela. It buys another 18 to 20% from Russia, which accounts for nearly 50% of Russia's total crude exports. But what if the conflict drags on?
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks.
Beijing has been stockpiling a significant amount of oil, and it had already begun ramping down its imports of Iranian oil in 2026 in exchange for more Russian oil. But Beijing has also been relying on other Middle East countries for oil, including the biggest supplier in the region, Saudi Arabia. Those exports also went through the Strait of Hormuz, which is closed. If Russia agrees to a peace deal with Ukraine, Beijing could lose another big oil supplier. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.